My name is Iryna Kalnytska. I'm a partner in Go Law firm. It's Ukrainian law firm with a head office in Kyiv and another office in Germany in Berlin. I'm a head of the tax practice in our law firm, and I'm also dealing with financial restructuring issues. Actually, it's a really great idea to acquire real estate in Ukraine. But it is very important to have necessary people behind you who will assist you and help you in this process. So first, if you decide to acquire a real estate in Ukraine, I would advise to first understand what exactly would you like to buy. Is it an apartment or it is a house with a small land plot, for example? Because you may be surprised that sometimes the price for an apartment in the very center of Kyiv will be even higher than the price for a small house a little bit far from the city center. So first you should decide what exactly would you like to buy. Then, for instance, for myself, I would advise to think about the tax consequences of this deal. Let me probably first deal with the side that relates to the legal aspects of this deal. Then I will cover some aspects how to do this from practical point of view. And in the end, we will talk about tax consequences and probably some fees that the potential buyer should incur in relates to acquiring a real estate in Ukraine. I remember it was a very good question. Is it advisable to contact the real estate broker in order to buy a real estate? So my answer will be yes. Of course, it is highly advisable and recommended to contact a professional real estate broker who will help you and who will guide you during this process. Why it is better? Again, from my personal experience and from practical point of view, lots of sellers are really reluctant to be contacted directly by the buyers. And for you as a buyer and for the seller, it will be much convenient and more easier when you will have some certain intermediary between you two. So it is absolutely advisable to deal with a real estate broker. This person will help you first to find an appropriate piece of real estate, then to understand the situation with the price. And third, this person also may help you to find a reliable notary with not ridiculous price who will help you to finalize this deal. So the third question, what should you think before acquiring a real estate? It is your tax number. If we're talking about Ukrainian residents who, like a long time ago, traveled to Canada and who are living in Canada right now, probably they already do not have a tax number in Ukraine. If it is the issue, then before dealing with a real estate broker and before even thinking about acquiring a real estate, it is highly advisable to receive a tax number. Why it is like this? Because it will take you up to 2 weeks to receive this number, and not to lose very precious time in the end when you already find some really nice apartment or a house. It's really better to think about this in advance. How to receive this tax number? Honestly, it's not very difficult. If you have a reliable lawyer, again, it's better to contact a lawyer. If not, you should just file a respective application to the tax authority with a copy of your passport, and you will have your tax number within like 10 business days. It's something like this. Once you have a tax number, then you can deal with a real estate broker and start looking for really your apartment or a house. So let's assume that you find a really nice apartment or a building, a house that you would like to acquire. What to do next? I would recommend to start with the technical due diligence of the property. Especially, it is very important and highly advisable when we're talking about a house, not an apartment, because you should be aware of the real technical conditions of the framings, of the sewage system, water supply, electricity supply, and all other conditions and all other issues that are really important in the house. Especially when we're talking about not newly created, like a just built house, but when we're talking about a real estate that was built like a long time ago. And once you receive a positive conclusion and positive results of this technical due diligence, you can start dealing with the legal side of this transaction. Of course, I would recommend to have your own legal team or a lawyer who will help you to conduct the legal due diligence and who will help you to go through this process from the legal point of view. What is legal due diligence and why do you need this? Legal due diligence will help you to understand that from legal point of view, this apartment or this house is absolutely clean and it is safe for you to acquire it and you will not have any legal problems in the future. For instance, after the legal due diligence, you will be aware if there are any minors who are registered in this apartment. Are there any encumbrances, liens on this apartment or house, or are there any other issues that can preclude you from acquiring this real estate? Because unfortunately, some years ago, it was a very popular situation where there were some legal disputes over the real estate property, and the buyer can just acquire this real estate and in future will face numerous problems and issues and even court disputes in relation to this property. So to be on the safe side, it is highly advisable to conduct not only technical due diligence, but also a legal due diligence. So once your lawyer confirms that everything is all right with this real estate from legal point of view, you can actually proceed with the transaction itself. Again, on the practical side, sometimes the sellers may ask you to pay a deposit for the real estate. Is it advisable to do this and how to do this properly? And also sellers may ask you to sign the preliminary agreement. What is preliminary agreement and why and when it is really necessary to sign it? Preliminary agreement is like a preliminary obligation of the seller and the buyer to sign the main agreement, the main sale purchase agreement in the future. When it is necessary, this preliminary agreement? It is necessary when you understand that it will take you really long time, for instance, 2 weeks or even more, to conclude the main sale purchase agreement. And in such kind of situation, to be sure that this apartment or this house will not go to someone else, that the seller will not conduct the same negotiations with another buyer, and for the seller to be sure that you will conduct your obligations and you will buy this real estate object, it is advisable for the parties to sign the preliminary agreement, where you confirm your future intentions to proceed with the main agreement and finalize it. Also, another advantage of the preliminary agreement is that you can pay the deposit absolutely legally and safely. Again, it is absolutely not advisable to pay the deposit in cash. You should just forget about cash operations in Ukraine. It is absolutely not right and not safe for you. Any cash operations are legally and possible only when you pay the amount of money not more than 50,000 hryvnias. So of course it's very, very little amount of money and it will not suit the deposit if we're talking about purchasing a real estate object. So if you want to pay the deposit and if the seller asks you to pay the deposit, it's better to do it under the preliminary agreement in a cashless format. Another issue that may arise is how to pay for this apartment, because sometimes the seller may ask you to pay, for instance, in foreign currency. Especially it is a very often situation when the seller understands that the buyer is non-resident of Ukraine or a foreigner or a person that lives abroad. Moreover, the seller may ask you to pay, the seller may tell you that he would like or she would like to receive the payment in cash. However, again, this does not mean that you should pay in cash. Again, never do this because it's very unsafe for you. So what to do in this situation? First, you can pay, for instance, from your bank account abroad directly to the bank account of the seller in Ukraine. And of course, these bank accounts may be in foreign currency, for instance, in dollars. In such a situation, the seller will receive foreign currency and the seller potentially can withdraw it from his bank account again in foreign currency. So at a first glance, this option is quite safe for the buyer and is workable. However, it's not everything is not so simple as it may seem. Why it is like this? Let's imagine the situation that, for instance, today you are going to the notary and you sign this sale purchase agreement. You sign the agreement, however, the ownership title will not pass to you until the seller receives the whole amount of money on its bank account. From practical point of view, it means that if, for instance, today you initiate the payment from your bank account abroad, the seller will technically see this money within 2 or even 3 days. It means that it will be only in 3 days then when you will receive the ownership title on this property. And again, from technical point of view, it means that within these 3 days, the seller theoretically may do whatever he wants with this property. And again, it means that theoretically, in some cases, the seller may sell this apartment to someone else. And it will be again after you initiate the payment. So such transaction will be very, very risky for the buyer, and I would not recommend to do this. So what to do in this situation and how the buyer may secure its interest? We recommend to use the escrow account. What is this escrow account? The escrow account is a special account that the escrow agent will provide for the buyer to secure its funds. In other words, the buyer first signs the escrow agreement with the escrow agent. It's an independent legal entity in Ukraine. Then the buyer pays the necessary amount of money on the escrow bank account. And this money stays on this bank account until the contract is signed and until the seller presents and the buyer presents to the escrow agent its application that yes, the agreement is signed and please transfer the money to the bank account of the seller. Why it is more advantageous to the buyer? Because after the money brings to the escrow agent bank account, they are already in Ukraine. And from practical point of view, how it is going on in real life. On the same day, the seller and the buyer go to the notary and they sign the sale purchase agreement together with the escrow agent. So actually, escrow agent is present at the deal. Then escrow agent and the buyer goes to the bank, and the buyer orders the escrow agent to send the monetary funds to the bank account of the seller. Then the seller receives this money and again goes to the notary and asks the notary to complete the deal and to transfer the ownership title to the buyer. So such a tool as an escrow agent will secure the monetary funds of the buyer and also the interest of the seller. In such a case, you may have the registration of the ownership title at the same day when the contract is signed. So I would recommend to use the escrow account if you have your money abroad. Another issue that you should think in advance is how to actually bring and how to send the money from your foreign bank account to Ukraine bank account. Why it is important? Because Ukrainian bank will conduct the financial monitoring of this transaction, and Ukrainian bank will for sure ask you where did you get this money from. So in other words, to put it simple, you should have the proof of origin of your funds. It can be, for instance, tax declaration. It is an ideal situation. Alternatively, it can be a loan agreement, for example. If you do not have the necessary amount of money, you can, for example, borrow it from someone and present a loan agreement to the bank as a proof of origin of funds. And it will be sufficient for Ukrainian banks. So it can be either loan or tax declaration or any other proof where you get this money from. So once you dealt with the escrow agent, you have your tax declaration or the loan agreement or anything else that prove the origin of funds. You should also think about other fees that you may incur when concluding this transaction. So as you probably understood, that any transaction with real estate is subject to notarization. So the main sale purchase agreement shall be notarized. And also the preliminary agreement, if you would like to sign it also should be notarized. So the notary fee in general is 1% from the sale price. It is a general like a price of the notaries. However, if you deal with a really professional real estate agent, from my practical experience, they usually recommend some notaries that charge much less. It can be a fixed amount of money, and it's not 1%. It is really much, much less. Again, this sum of money, this notary fee, usually shall be splitted between the buyer and the seller, like 50-50. It's a general practice. So you can ask your real estate agent to ask the seller to split this fee with you. Moreover, the buyer is also obliged to pay the pension fund. It is also 1% from the sale price. And this is actually all the official fees that the buyer may incur in relation to this transaction. But you also should think about some minor fees for translation of the documents, legalization of the documents, or for instance, if we're talking about loan agreement, this agreement shall be translated to Ukrainian, and the translation for some banks shall be notarized. If we're talking about some passport data or something like this, sometimes the notary is also asked to translate these documents to Ukrainian language. And this is actually all the main issues that you should think before acquiring a real estate in Ukraine. What else is maybe important for you is the tax consequences of acquiring a real estate here in our country. Because once you become an owner of real estate in Ukraine, you're obliged to pay taxes here. If we're talking about an apartment, it will be only real estate tax. If we're talking about a house, it will be both real estate tax and the land tax. What will be the tax rate? Actually, the tax rate differs from year to year, and it is established annually by the local council. However, there is a maximum threshold which cannot be exceeded by the local council. To put it simple, for example, in 2021, the maximum tax rate in numbers will be 90 hryvnias for 1 square meter. So it's not that much. Moreover, you should remember that there are some tax incentives for the apartments and for the houses. If we're talking about an apartment, you will have a tax incentives in the amount of 60 square meters per an apartment and 120 meters for the house. I will explain how it works. For instance, you buy a house with a total area 200 square meters. However, you have a tax incentive for this house in the amount of 120 square meters. It means that your taxable base for this house will be only 80 square meters. And if you acquire this house in 2021, to calculate the tax, you should actually double 90 hryvnias per 80 square meters. This will be your tax for 2021. All individuals receive their tax notice decisions. It is like a tax receipt, which you can use to pay your tax obligations from the tax authorities by post, or alternatively, you can be registered in the electronic cabinet of the taxpayer, and you will receive these informations online, which is, in my personal opinion, is much more convenient. I believe that this is the main important information that you should think about before acquiring the real estate. And to sum up, I would outline the most important issues. First, it is highly advisable to find a professional real estate broker. Second, it is very advisable to find a good lawyer who will help you to deal with the technical due diligence of the real estate, then who will help you to conduct the legal due diligence of the real estate. Also, the lawyer will provide you with a draft of the sale purchase agreement, of the preliminary agreement, and will help you to deal with an escrow agent if it is required. I believe that this is all. This is the main information that you should be aware of before acquiring the real estate. Once you understand what exact apartment or house you would like to acquire, it will take you up to 3 weeks to complete the deal. Up to 3 weeks is absolutely doable. Even 2 weeks, I would say. No, it's not absolutely difficult, and I would say that there are no bureaucracy at all, because you're dealing only with the notary. And that's all. You have the seller is individual, you have the buyer who is individual, You may probably have a real estate broker who is again individual, and all these people like a private individuals, and so there is no bureaucracy, and the only public official is the notary, who is also very interested in completion this deal as far as possible to get its commission and just to forget about this. So I would say that almost no bureaucracy. I can give you an example. For instance, if we're talking about acquiring a real estate with a price of $500,000, yeah, like roughly, then all the additional fees may be covered by $10,000. Yeah, so it's not that much. Translation is not very expensive in Ukraine. Legal fees, for instance, in our law firm, it's a fixed fee and it's not that much. A technical due diligence, again, it's a fixed fee. A real estate agent, they charge, probably they charge percent, but it's not that much. So in general, all these additional fees in Ukraine, they're not that much as they may be abroad. But again, if we're talking about private investments, it has nothing to do with all these like a scary stories that you may hear about our country. Because when you buy some real estate as an individual, it will be treated as a foreign investment. This is the first. Second, nobody actually is interested in getting away some apartment or a house, a building. It's not that much interesting for potential raiders. Let it be like this. I will be also very honest with you. If we're talking about some business issues, especially very successful business, then probably some issues may arise, some tax problems, some other problems. But when we're talking about just acquiring an apartment or a house for living, like a residential property, I believe that those issues and concerns are really irrelevant here. So the risks are absolutely minimal, and you should mitigate all these risks at the stage of legal due diligence to be sure that no former owner or ex-wife or ex-husband of the seller will come to you in a few weeks and say, come on, I will challenge this transaction because I did not give my consent for this deal. To avoid these problems, you should be on the safe side and conduct this both legal and technical due deal. Honestly, I haven't heard lots of like scary stories about something went wrong with a personal, like a private property. This is the first. The second, I believe that this is the more issue of, in general, the investment climate in Ukraine. And to be honest, during the last few years, this climate becomes more favorable for foreign investors. And for instance, our law firm, we work really a lot with foreign investors. Of course, it is more business, legal entities, but we successfully protect them from all the problems and issues that they may face from our governmental authorities. And if we're talking about individuals are not going to deal with governmental authorities. All this transaction is lays in a private environment. So I do not see any even potential issues that may arise. The only obligation that the investor will have is to pay your taxes, your real estate tax in time. And then I believe that everything will go all right. I should say also something very important, that I'm not talking about acquiring a pure land without a house, because acquiring land in Ukraine is absolutely another business and absolutely another issue. That is very complicated, and that is where the bureaucracy may come and all the other issues that you may heard about our country. Well, actually, I covered everything that I would like to share with you. But again, I would like to stress out that it is really convenient, and we have lots of construction projects with really nice apartments in the center of the Kyiv that the foreigner may, for instance, acquire and further rent or just have an investment in our country. And as a tendency, I see that currently the prices for the real estate, they grow up. So if you really considering acquiring something in our country, currently it's the best time to do this, because nobody knows what will be next year. And again, very important issue. There is a draft bill in Ukrainian parliament that will introduce value-added tax that is 20% on the newly constructed objects. Here I'm talking about apartments in buildings. So I believe that from 2022, all the happy owners of the newly created apartments will be obliged to pay the value added tax. In other words, I expect that the prices for the apartments will increase by 20% because, of course, developers are not going to pay this tax by their own. So now is the best time to think about this. Thank you. Thank you, William, very much. It was my pleasure. Thank you.